Hello students, welcome to Uttaram. Now in the different videos that we have posted previously, we have covered different topics under the chapter Diversity in Living World. Now today we are going to start a fresh series of subunits under this chapter, that is the Five Kingdom classification. Now there has been a series of evolution, a series of changes experienced in the system of classification. So in this video we will be covering the introductory portion. From the next video onwards we will be discussing the characteristics of all the five kingdoms. So as you can see, the first attempt of classification was made by Carolus Linnaeus, and here he classified the living organisms into two kingdoms, that is Plantae and Animalia. So only two kingdoms were used to classify all the organisms existing at the time. So obviously this system of classification was faulty, as there are several other organisms which do not exhibit the characteristics of these two groups. So there was no distinction made between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. These were the main two flaws. He basically divided the organisms into two groups, Plantae and Animalia. So if I compare the system with the current five kingdom classification that we have, they are all eukaryotic groups. So where would we place the prokaryotes? And why should we place them in the these two groups? So this was faulty. No distinction was made between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. No distinction between unicellular and multicellular organisms. So there are certain groups which consists of only unicellular organisms, and there are certain ones which contain the higher forms, the multicellular forms. So there was no distinction made. No distinction between photosynthetic and the non-photosynthetic organisms. So if I am to place algae and fungi, they are both having different modes of nutrition. So it will be illogical to place them under the kingdom Plantae. Few organisms did not fall into either category, such as Euglena, protists, different types of protists, the bacteria. Why would we place them under the kingdom Plantae and Animalia? So this two kingdom system was rejected. Next, we have the three kingdom system. So obviously, two kingdom system was faulty, and therefore we introduced, not we, another system of classification came into existence, that is called three kingdom classification. It was proposed by Haeckel in the year 1866, and to the previously existing groups, that is Plantae and Animalia, he introduced a third group, that is protists. Protists or Protista and Animalia. Now you can see that the basis of classification was the cellularity. These were the unicellular ones. So Protista included all the unicellular organisms, whereas these two consisted of the multicellular organisms. So this group was again rejected. Let us check the reasons as to why it was rejected. Each group has a vast variety of organisms having distinctive properties. For example, algae, fungi, Monera, Protista were all placed under the group Protists. So we are placing algae, fungi, Monera and Protozoa were all pushed into one group, that is Protista. Why? Because they were unicellular. So this is again faulty. Prokaryotes and eukaryotes were again not separated. Protists included both unicellular and multicellular organisms, and viruses were also not included in this group. So this classification was again rejected, and again a third classification system came into the picture, that is the four kingdom classification. So what was the improvement here? We already had three kingdoms, right? Plantae, Protista, and Animalia. Now a fourth kingdom was added to it, that is Monera. This was again not accepted. Why? The same issue. Fungi was placed along with plantae. Now plants and fungus, although they have cell wall, but the nature of cell wall is different and their mode of nutrition is also different. So how can we place them under the same kingdom? So this system, although proposed by Copeland in the year 1956, you can say it's quite recent, but it was rejected. And finally, the most accepted system of classification came into the picture, which was proposed by R.H. Whitaker in the year 1969. So now we have the five kingdom classification. These are the five kingdoms that we have. Uh, Now let us discuss about the criteria for categorization. See, there is always some basis for classification. No? So let us check what are the basis of classification of these five kingdoms. So complexity of cell structure, separate groups for unicellular ones, separate groups for multicellular ones, separate groups for prokaryotes, separate groups for eukaryotes. Complexity of body structure, just now I said. Modes of nutrition. The autotrophs were separated. The photoautotrophs were separated, isn't it? They were placed under the group Plantae, and the rest were placed under different groups according to their other characters. Next is ecological lifestyle. And lastly, the phylogenetic relationship. What is the phylogenetic relationship? The more primitive ones were placed under the Monera, and the more higher groups of plants and animals were placed under the groups Plantae and Animalia. Alright, so these were the criteria kept in mind during the five kingdom classification. So let us look into details of the five kingdom classification. Here you can see the organisms were divided on the basis of eukaryotic and prokaryotic nature of the cell. Alright, so what is prokaryotic cells? We all know it doesn't have a distinct nucleus, right? And it is primitive in nature. It does not have membrane bound cell organelles also. So those are the characteristics of prokaryotic cells. So the prokaryotic organisms were placed under the group Monera, and the rest eukaryotes were again divided into the different were now all the other organisms were eukaryotes. Now you have to further differentiate eukaryotes, right, on the basis of other characters. So now which character was organized, now which character was considered cell nature, whether it's unicellular or multicellular. So the unicellular ones were placed under the protista, and the multicellular ones were placed under the animalia. Now protists, they have cell wall, they may have cell wall. Well, some multicellulars were placed under the Plantae also. But if I am to talk about the presence or absence of cell wall, then the other groups were, I mean, the unicellular ones were placed under the protist. Let's understand the details first. The unicellular ones, the unicellular eukaryotes were placed under the protista. Rest, now we are left with multicellular organisms. So how do we classify it? We classify it with the presence or absence of, with the uh, presence or absence of cell wall. So those having cell wall were present under a separate group, and those not having cell wall were placed under a separate group, which is called animalia. Now, organisms having cell wall exhibited difference. Some had chitinous cell wall, some had cellulose and other stuff. And the mode of nutrition was also different. Some were autotroph, some were heterotroph. So now between the organisms having cell wall gave rise to two groups, fungi and fungi. Alright, so do not get confused with the flowchart. It almost looks like unicellular organisms were placed under, were further divided into fungi and fungi. No, this is the criteria that is used. It's not like the protists gave rise to Plantae. You can check over here, this arrow points to the two groups, one having cell wall and one devoid of cell wall. Clear? Next, moving on to the study of the five kingdoms in brief. So let us check the characteristics first. Cell type. Cell type, whether it's prokaryote or eukaryote. So you can see from the chart, among all the five kingdoms, only monerans are prokaryotes. Rest are all eukaryotic in nature. Next, we have the cell organization. So what is cell organization? Whether it is a unicellular organism or a multicellular organism. So unicellular organisms, monerans are unicellular, protists are mostly unicellular. And from fungi onwards, it's mostly multicellular, but some fungi like yeast, they are unicellular. All right. Next, we have the cell wall. Presence of cell wall. So monerans, they do have a cell wall, but the nature is different. It is made up of peptidoglycan. Protists, the cell wall is present in some organisms, right? But it is absent in most. Next, cell wall is present in present in fungi also, and they are of different nature. They are made up of chitin. Whereas plant cells, they also have cell wall just like the fungal cell, but the composition is different. It is composition and nature, everything is different. They are made up of cellulose. The group which is devoid of any cell wall is Animalia. Next, mode of nutrition. So mode of nutrition for Monera is autotroph and heterotroph. So monerans exhibit both the modes of nutrition. They can be photoautotrophic. They can be well. They can be photoautotrophic. Why? Because we are considering cyanobacteria or blue-green algae under this moneran group. So they are autotrophic and they can be chemosynthetic also. Like there are some bacteria which use different chemicals, chemical like sulfur and other substances as their source of energy. Instead of carbon dioxide, like the photoautotrophs, they use something different. So they are chemosynthetic bacteria. And there are heterotrophs also, parasites, saprophytes. Next, we have protists. So protists, they can be autotroph or heterotroph both. For fungi, they are always heterotrophic. They can be parasitic or saprophytic. Plantae, they are always autotrophic. And lastly, Animalia, they are always heterotrophic. Next, we have the examples. So under Monera, we have Eubacteria archaea, and under the protists, we have the different example, euglenoids, more other stuffs. And under fungi, we have yeast, mold, mushrooms, agaricus, all those things are there. Under plant, we have tree, fern, all those things. And under animals, we have insects, birds, fish, mammals. All right. So they all come under the. So this is a brief description of the five kingdoms. We'll be considering about the characteristics of each kingdoms in details in our next upcoming videos. Now this five kingdom classification, in spite of being extremely popular and well accepted, it also had drawbacks. First drawback was viruses have not been included in the system of classification. We have considered bacteria, we have considered fungus, we have considered protists, but we have not considered viruses. Archaea differs from other bacteria in composition, structure, and physiology, but they were pushed into the group Monera. All right. Next, diversity of protists. Protists are extremely diverse organisms. You can see that the group was almost like there was multicellular ones, there were unicellular ones. So it is a very diverse group which requires further study. Next, there was ambiguity regarding the position of unicellular algae. Like I said, unicellular algae, they were sometimes placed under the protists, sometimes placed under the kingdom Plantae. So there is still a confusion regarding the position of unicellular algae. All right. So these were the flaws, and this character especially, this flaw especially, Archaebacteria differs from the other bacteria in composition and in composition, structure, and physiology. This flaw gave rise to another theory. So now we have the three domains of life. What is that? Carl Woese in the year 1977. What did he do? Till now, I've discussed in the previous lecture the taxonomic hierarchy. There are different categories into which the organisms are classified. So the first one was the kingdom. That is the highest level of taxonomic hierarchy. Now what he did, he introduced another higher level of taxonomy, that is domain. And he divided the organisms into three, he divided the life forms into three domains: archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. All right. And this division was done on the basis of S, on the basis of RNA genes. rRNA genes. So this was the basis of classification of Carl Woese. So the archaea and bacteria, as you can understand, they're all prokaryotes, and the eukaryotic groups were placed under the domain eukarya. So archaea and bacteria, why were the prokaryotes divided? Previously, we had only Monera, the kingdom Monera, which consisted of all the prokaryotes. But they were so much diverse. The archaebacteria differed from showed difference from the archaea, showed difference from the bacteria. So much difference was exhibited that he decided to divide it on the basis of the 16S RNA genes. They were divided. So now uh, the prokaryotes were separated into archaea and bacteria based on the 16S rRNA genes, and therefore now we have the 6 kingdoms of classification, 6 kingdoms of the organisms. Now we have the 6 kingdom classification system, but still in use is the 5 kingdom classification. But for your knowledge, you can always know that there is another advanced system of classification, that is the 6 kingdom of classification system. And you can see over here that the domains, the another taxonomic level domain was introduced. Under the domain bacteria, under the domain bacteria, this one. See, we have the bacteria. They are the unicellular prokaryotes. Again, under the domain archaea, we have the archaebacteria. They have an extreme difference in their characters. Okay, although over here you can see there I've only mentioned they are unicellular prokaryotes for your better understanding, but they have huge difference in their physiology and also in the chemical nature. So the third domain, which included of all the eukaryotes, were named eukarya, and under the eukarya we have the protists, fungi, plantae, and animae. Okay. So that is all about the theory portion. Now let us go into a few questions to test your knowledge. So we have over here is a question. In Whitaker's system of classification, eukaryotes were assigned how many kingdoms? So this question, students, please look into it. In Whitaker's system of classification, eukaryotes were assigned how many kingdoms? Whitaker system means the 5 kingdom system. Classification, one group was assigned to the prokaryotes, one kingdom consisted of the prokaryotes, and 4 other kingdoms consisted of the eukaryotes. Hence, we can say that eukaryotes were assigned 4 kingdoms. So the correct answer is option D. Next question. In 5 kingdom classification system, if 5 kingdom classification system was used, in which kingdom would you classify archaea and nitrogen fixing organisms? Now, five kingdom classification system contained all the prokaryotes under the head Monera, isn't it? The difference was introduced in the six kingdom classification system, but in the five kingdom classification system, they were all placed under the category Monera, that is a unicellular prokaryote. So from here, the correct answer will be one kingdom. In one kingdom, under one kingdom Monera, all these organisms were placed. Archaea, nitrogen fixing organisms. So the blue-green algae, the nitrogen fixing organisms, and the methanogenic archaebacteria, isn't it? Archaebacteria and eubacteria, they were all placed under the group Monerans. Okay. So this is all about the introduction to the five kingdom classification. Now in the following videos, in the upcoming videos, I will be describing in detail the characteristics of the all five kingdoms. So that's all for today, students. Hope you have enjoyed the lecture, and don't forget to follow Uttaron on different social media handles. And again, keep revising your concepts. We have covered some topics by now, so please revise the concepts, otherwise, it will be useless. So, thank you.